you'll see that the first thing I've put on Moodle is a document which is from Geoffrey Petty's book, Teaching Today, which looks at Bloom's taxonomy of writing smart outcomes for your session. The learning outcomes are what you write saying what you want your learners to achieve during the session. And it's very important to write these correctly. If you haven't been really specific about your learning outcomes and made sure that they're measurable, it'll be very difficult to assess whether learning has taken place at the end of the session and whether the learners are able to do what you expect them to. So use this document, which will guide you through a taxonomy, which is a classification or a listing put together by Bloom, which covers writing of learning outcomes. And you should make sure that you're using these words and phrases as outcomes for your learners in your lesson plan. As you can see, in the knowledge section there are words such as define and describe and list and identify. There's a reason that we choose words like this rather than using more everyday descriptions such as understand or have an appreciation of. Let's imagine that I'm in a session covering something like the Data Protection Act. If I say as my learning outcome, learners will understand the Data Protection Act, and at the end of the session I say to my class, okay, does everybody understand the Data Protection Act? And they say yes. Can I be certain that they've actually got to grips with the real knowledge that I was trying to put across here? If I'm a little bit more specific when I write my learning outcomes, I can say that my learners will be able to list the 8 requirements of the Data Protection Act, and that for each of these 8 requirements they'll be able to explain what this means for somebody that is storing and processing data. Then I can ask my learners specific questions and I can make sure that learning has taken place. And if you make sure that when you are writing the outcomes on your lesson plan that you stick to the words and phrases in the Bloom Petty listing, you'll ensure that your outcomes are smart. Where possible, try to quantify them, using phrases such as learners will be able to list 8 things or describe 5 factors, and then you'll be sure that your outcomes are truly smart. The next document you'll find on Moodle is a template for an exemplar lesson. Now you don't have to stick to this. As a matter of fact, it's probably more appropriate for, say, session 5 out of a 10-block week of study. But I've put it up there so you can use it for reference if required. You'll see that the exemplar lesson actually starts with a summary of key points from the last session. This is important in order to revisit learning, although you wouldn't be doing this in a one-off micro session. Then the session moves through presentation of theory, student activity, assessment of learning, and finally ends with a summary and chances for questions and answers from the learners. Again, the purpose of this template is a model of good practice and not something that we would expect you to stick rigidly to in your micro session if it's not appropriate for your topic. The next document I've put up on Moodle is another document from Petty's 2007 book Teaching Today, and it's actually using the mnemonic educare, which means to bring out what is within or draw out. And Petty uses educare as a mnemonic for what you should be doing during an ideal session. E stands for explanation, which is where you explain what you're going to do and why it's important to learners. D is for the doing detail, which is you giving a demonstration of what's going to be done and showing models of good practice to learners. U is the use phrase, where your learners will actually practice the skill or look into the piece of theory that you're delivering. And it's very important that adult learners get to use the knowledge that you want to put across to them. C stands for check and correct. This is where you give the students feedback and constructive guidance on their learning and the activities that they're doing. A is for aide memoir. This means providing learners with a handout or web references or other materials that they can take away and revisit and reflect upon after the session. Another thing that's very important with adult learners. R is for review, reuse and revise. We've seen already in Carol Thompson's input video that it's very important in terms of retention to keep revisiting learning. And unless learning is reviewed, it's too often forgotten. So make sure you are reviewing and revising the key points of the session, and that learners have an opportunity to reuse and practice any practical skills that they're gaining. Finally, evaluation. It's important that learners actually get the chance to evaluate their learning and internalise it and think about it. And finally, the question mark is there because it's very important to allow learners to question at the end if they've got any questions on the activities or to clear up any problems or issues they might have about the learning. The next document that you'll find up in the planning section of Moodle is a micro-teaching individual plan. You might find this useful as a spur for thoughts and ideas if you're unsure what to take as a topic for your micro session or you're not sure how to do it. So use this as a way of collecting your thoughts. It actually covers a topic that you might be thinking of, activities you could use, resources you might use, the topic to deliver, and again uses Educare as a lesson plan outline. So that is there for you to use to make notes as you consider the topic for your micro session and how you're going to deliver it and assess the learning. Finally, in the planning section, you'll see that I've put up an exemplar lesson plan, and again this is a planner for a petal session, and below that you'll find the blank template which you need to use when you're planning your own micro lesson.